Hi, everybody out there in internet land. My name is Amy Chen Mills. I'm a part of the Love BIPOC Three Principles group. Love stands for Listening to Unheard Voices, Beautiful, Inspiring People of Color. And we've been working together for about 5 years now, and we're getting all kinds of videos up on our website. And today I have the honor of interviewing Karen Evanoff, who is of Dena'ina Athabascan culture. Dena'ina. Did I say that right?
Anna.
Dena'ina Athabascan. And you're up in Alaska, but isn't there a connection between Alaska and like Navajo people? Is that true?
Yeah.
So tell us about your culture and background.
Well, culturally, we're connected to the Navajo. Athabascan people is a fairly large group. It spreads from mostly interior Alaska through Canada. And we have similar cultural background, even some language that is the same as Navajo.
So there must have been, I think people came down all the way through Canada, all the way down to like the southwest of the United States now.
It's part of the theory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And could you tell us a little bit about what you were doing in your life before you came upon the three principles? And then we'll talk about after and also in the middle of.
What was I doing in my life? So that was over 10 years ago now when I came across the three principles. And at that time, so I've been a seeker like most people since the early 1989, 90s when I was going through counseling training to be a counselor in the small village I'm from. And so that began my seeking journey because I learned about codependency and I learned about Al-Anon, people affected by alcoholism, which is a big part of my life, was a big part of my life. And so I've been through many programs, many meditations, learned so much over the years. And I was introduced to the principles through my Al-Anon sponsor at the time. And I was curious because she was the most grounded I had felt her in a long time. And I asked her, what's going on with you? I thought she had just come back from another meditation because she was doing 10-day meditations. And she sent me a link to a video, couple videos. One was by recordings, one was audio, Sydney Banks, and another was Michael Neal. So I listened to those, and that concept of we're already whole and complete, I had never heard before. And I had been through many therapy included and counseling and all that stuff. And so that really got me curious. That began my journey of learning more and connecting with many 3P practitioners over the years and trainings and that sort of thing.
So it was about it sounds like the idea that got you hooked was the idea that we are all whole and complete.
Yes.
Yeah. And what did that mean to you personally?
I felt it when I heard that. I felt that inner wholeness and completeness inside me. It's like I went from my head to my heart. I went deeper real quick. I think what was important to me in that is it kind of loosened up my seeking. And it also got me more in touch with that something I always felt throughout my life, something more than the world around me. I always sensed that. And the sensing I know started, we're born as spiritual beings until we get hooked into the world around us and make stories about that. So I've always felt that. And I think when I grew up real close to nature, 2-room cabin. My dad had a dog team and no electronics, of course. So I think my journey of trying to get that feeling of well-being, feeling of flow with life back, it began when I was put in school at age 6. And my mind was trying to cope with such a contrast between the white room, fluorescent lights, and, a non-native teacher, a white teacher, and being out in nature. And so I started that journey of trying to feel better, looking outside me to feel better.
When you were young, it sounds like.
Very young. And then years later, through like I mentioned, the counseling training, I saw something that there was names for what, like codependency or being affected by alcoholism. And so I got into that, the different programs and the different labels, psychology can put on certain ways we cope with life, really.
So you had been affected by alcoholism in your life?
Very much, yes. I grew up in a small community in Alaska. There's no road. We have many small villages spread through Alaska Native villages. And so no road connection, small village of like 175 people. And whatever happens in a small village, everybody's affected. And I saw the increase of alcoholism, early on, although it wasn't directly in my home. I come from parents who was affected by it through either their parents or grandparents. And then I was married to a chronic drinker. Yeah, I thought my job was to change everybody and fix the world. And that was a huge chore, let me tell you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you what work you were doing because I know you're obviously an Indigenous person living, I think, either on Indigenous territory still or adjacent to it. And your work was with trying to put forward Indigenous history. Is that or working with the Park Service? Could you talk about what your work was?
Yeah, I got my college degree in cultural anthropology, and my goal with that was to make sure that Indigenous voice, stories, perspectives was told through the voice of Indigenous people themselves. Because what I was seeing often is outside researchers coming in and recording or documenting, and then a lot of times the translation or interpretation was not true to the deeper meaning. And I also wanted to make sure Native people were at the table when any project or discussion or book was done about them. So I got my degree, and I have to say, I started to call it back in college in 1990 with the goal of getting a degree in social work. And I switched my degree in cultural anthropology by the second year I was in college, because I was in a class, in anthropology class, and the professor one day started reading a story written down, old oral history written by my great uncle, my dad's uncle. And that was the first time I felt any connection in school, besides in elementary, learning a little about poetry. And I switched my major. And I feel like, throughout my life, and I think it's that way for all of us, there is divine intervention. There's the messages. I just didn't see it as that. When I look back, I could see many seeds that was planted for me along the way. And it wasn't me thinking my way there, trying to get there. It was just a seed planted. So when I heard that story, that connection lit me up. It's like, that's what I want to do. I want to learn more about the stories and work with elders. And elders, especially the ones who live and grew up close to the earth, to the land, have a sense of groundedness that I don't often feel or didn't feel. And in today's world, with the fast pace of life. So that's what I was drawn to, along with the stories, the deeper stories and meaning of that.
I know that you were kind of a social justice warrior also, and I think that at this time there's so much happening nationally that it feels like a rollback of civil rights and equality and, of course, diversity, equity, inclusion issues. So I think this is an important topic, but I know that you changed your approach to all of that. But I wonder if you could talk about how it was for you prior to really gaining an understanding of the principles and your own spiritual sort.
For me, well, I grew up with a dad who was very outspoken. You know, we have this what's called subsistence in Alaska for hunters, fishers, gatherers. I mean, we still live a lifestyle that way. And of course, there's seasons, laws by the state and federal put in place years ago regulating when hunting and fishing or any of that was to happen. I watched my dad fight against that, among other things, and I think he was a big kind of a role model inspiration for me doing some of the work I did. And part of that was speaking up for our rights, Indigenous rights, as far as fishing and hunting, our rights in what was written about us and who wrote it. And for me, dealing with that, our rights and our access also to health and well-being and what was available. You know, that was a big one for me, the health and well-being, because I'm a trained counselor also, including Indigenous ways of approaching healing and health and well-being. I did a lot of research and documenting in that. But my approach was really working hard to make things better and right, especially for Indigenous people. And I did it in a way where, oh my gosh, I got burnt out many times over the years, just giving so much, fight or flight. Also very righteous, my way or the highway. We are the highway. And just wanting to make a difference, really working hard to make a difference. And with no thought or even the concept of me, how do I really feel? It was, there's this thing and then there's the next thing. And when you're working in the area of social justice or speaking up or different issues, there's no end. There's always something that comes up. And so, yeah, I got pretty burnt out, gave a lot of myself without any thought of me. And the big thing one of the other things I did is every time I learned about another method or like Al-Anon or codependency, or everybody else had to learn about it, relatives, some of that I brought back to the community. And so passing on what I was learning was a big thing too, trying to get people to get it. That really softened up and slowed me down when I came across the understanding of how we're made as human beings. My thought didn't have to run and dictate everything I did. I think that was one of the big things when I came across the understanding was slowing down. And today, that's a really important part of my life is slowing down. I can feel when I'm getting revved up. I catch myself a lot quicker.
You said something about health and well-being and being concerned about the availability. Do you mean like availability in your community? What are you speaking of when you say that?
Access to resources. In the communities, there's limited resources. That you can have one person who's the police officer and the healthcare provider and the tribal council member and the road cleaner. You wear multiple hats.
That reminds me. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of when I was working in Mississippi in the Delta, and I went to the airport, and I parked my rental car in the parking lot and just took the keys inside, handed them to the person who was checking me in. And then that person ran to the security checkpoint and was put me through the security. And then I looked out the airplane window as we were taking off, and that same person was directing the plane, running back and forth, doing all the jobs, you know?
Yes, that's a good example because that's what it is. You're directing and then you're in this thing and then you got this other hat on.
Yeah.
So multiple roles, and that's the way it has to be. And not everybody, does. There's certain people who ends up with these roles, multiple roles.
And that's tricky to be an officer, police officer, and then also to be trying to provide mental health counsel. I mean, you can see that the roles could be a little bit in conflict with one another and so forth, right? So,
Yeah. And just to clarify, it's not my role. It's any general person's role. And in the villages, it's called village police officer, VPSO, village police safety officer. And so law enforcement or a trooper coming in could be, miles away, and they have to fly in everywhere we go between the places with small aircraft. I don't know, what was your question?
My question was, so you're looking for services, you're looking for more resources, maybe actual people to come and be the counselors, or money to come and train people or whatever. Is that right?
Money to not only train people, but access to the availability of resources. And the more I've gotten immersed in some of the trainings and mentors I've had over the years, and the availability, sometimes funding people can't afford, paying big money to, and also not knowing exactly what to look for. I think it's knowing what to look for, really. It's part of that. Is one of the things I've thought about is how do we make more understanding the principles more available to diverse populations across the world, where it's more meeting them from where they're at, where it's language that they connect to. We're just starting up here in Alaska because I've worked with a team of younger people the last few years, and we started a nonprofit. And part of that is education, remembering our cultural values as far as taking care of the earth, and that's key, protecting place and caring for what the earth offers. And so because I know how much the understanding has worked for me and changed my life, I'm not trying so hard in life. I'm flowing more with life. We just had a training at a retreat, actually, where we had Inside Alliance, who passes on this understanding from Oregon. Their team works out of Oregon, and they came up to Alaska, met with tribal council members and part of our nonprofit business team. And it was a 3-day training and 3-day retreat, passing this understanding on. And the people got it first day. And I think part of it is there's a sense of deeper connection already from all people. But even at another level, if you're living close to Earth, you're feeling more. You're not so always caught up in daily worldly. The Earth, the natural world, is such a teacher and a mirror of who we are as human beings.
Yeah. I mean, and also, sorry.
Well, access at different levels is so important. And opportunity, how do we open the door wider for opportunity for Indigenous people who may not have the resources or the means to programs that are offered, a lot of them online, or then you're traveling to a retreat and it's,
expensive. Yeah.
Expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a huge concern of the Love BIPOC group, is how to make things affordable, make things relatable. And it's not that, you couldn't have, let's say, a white person go in and talk to people from the principles. I think that can happen. It's just sometimes the doors open a crack wider when you've got someone who's Indigenous or a person of color speaking as at least one of the trainers to the group. And I also want to share just in my experience of working with Indigenous groups in Winnipeg and in Red Lake, and also working with the Black community in the Deep South. These are very religious people. There's like a spirituality already going on. And the principles, what I have found is the principles come in and help people make the connection between the spirituality that's in their minds and also in their hearts, but connecting it to the day-to-day, to day-to-day living. I don't know if you have discovered that as well, but that's something that I saw in my work.
Yeah, I like how you said that, connecting to the spirituality already going on. And
Yeah.
in the spirituality, of course, we're spiritual beings, yet there's certain spiritual ways that could open the path wider and keep us, or I should speak for me, keep me more grounded in the spirit of who I am. And was loosened up as I fought or flighted throughout life against so many causes. And it pulled me away from the true being of who I am. As I got sucked in more and more and more, my head was spinning. And so that spiritual essence that ignites that part of us, I feel, is so at the fingertips of people, of all people, for one. And I've witnessed it as someone who grew up close to nature. That was my foundation. That was a mirror for me. I felt something more than who I was. So I think it can be so simple. The understanding and passing it on is just pointing back in simple ways. And that's what I loved about the Insight Alliance and what they have to offer. And they also have a very diverse, some of them Native American people on their team. And so they get it. A lot of them get it. They get being marginalized,
Mm-hmm.
or having to speak up or prove. And that was another thing in my journeys. I felt I always had to prove I knew enough, or prove I'm at that level to where and so that could become a really tiring too, trying to prove yourself or prove myself. And so that connection I observed a lot in this retreat, and the approach and the interaction. Because what they did is, the Insight Alliance team, is they met the people from where they're at. They didn't come in, they came in with a loose agenda. It was where people were coming from.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up a lot of topics that I would love to explore. Like, for example, the idea of proving and the idea of social justice activism, or I don't even know if you want to call that activism. It's just like a lot of people say, when you're a person of color, particularly Indigenous, I think, and Black people, and probably lots of people of color, feel like they have to prove themselves to be worthy. So, but then there's also like what happens. Okay, so sometimes there's anger involved in activism. Sometimes there's like a pushing involved in activism or social change work. I sometimes call it racial healing work, actually, because I like that term. And so what's the difference, I guess? Because, there was Karen before and Karen after, and I understand that you're still promoting the Indigenous causes and work that you were doing before. What's the difference? Is there sometimes still anger? Is there sometimes still stepping up? But how is it different for you?
Yeah, those feelings can still come up, anger and even sadness with a change. We're looking at language laws where we have less than 10 fluent speakers of our language. So there's a big movement right now to revitalize language and teach it. We're planning a camp, 10th year of camp, out at the lake in my ancestral lands. And language learning and teaching is part of the central theme of what we do at that camp. I think the big thing for me is been I don't stay there as long. I can feel the anger and allow it, and just allowing the big thing that I'm renewing, in a way, my slowing down. to where I'm more in tune with my feelings and allowing. I'm realizing with the understanding that it's not about changing my thought or my thoughts at all. It's about, because I can't change the thoughts that come through me, but it's allowing the thoughts that create certain feelings. And if I need to feel angry, just allow it. In grieving, naturally, healing has come more natural. I used to think, there's this movement of we need to heal, quote, we need to heal. And to me, that's changed my perspective of that is if we keep saying we need to heal, we're saying that we're broken.
Yeah.
And we're not. My healing as I've slowed down and allowed the feelings have come more naturally. There's times when things have come up where I need to have a good cry is part of my grieving or sadness. And in the renewal of a slowing down, I can feel more of me even more deeply. And I've also I went on this wave of searching in the 3P community too, the next training, the next topic, the next, how can I teach this? The next pass this on. And that can become a mode too of seeking. And slowing down for me has really meant that getting in touch with the parts of me that already know. And the more I look outside me seeking for somebody else who I think knows better, I'm going to learn, I'm back up here. I'm in that mindset of trying to learn more. And this understanding is not about learning from my head, it's about feeling from my heart.
Yeah.
More gently and more slowly, I'm coming to terms with that. I'm meeting myself more fully. Something I wanted to mention too is the subtle bias that could come between different cultures or different people with different colored skin labels. If you hear the name Native American, what comes to mind? I think a picture automatically forms in people's mind of what kind of human being that is and who you are. And through that bias, it can be subtle that people of other cultures don't even realize. They may be seeing me or another person of color from that mindset, from that label. And I think a big part is recognizing how we label each other.
Yeah.
And how that keeps our story about certain cultures and people in place.
Yeah. I wanted to just comment on your talking about, seeking within the principles community, seeking for more, more, and who's going to be the best teacher for this or that. And I remember when I went through my first training in Santa Clara County, it was very intensive. I jumped in with both feet. It was actually an intensive training of trainers program through the Department of Alcohol and Drug Services. And I remember getting to a point where I was like, right now I have a lot of words in my head. I have levels of consciousness. I have states of mind. I have personal thought and impersonal thought. I have feelings and all those terms and concepts. And I remember thinking it was all good. I'm not saying it wasn't a good thing for me to be there. It was a really good thing for me to be there. But then there was a point where I just thought, I need to just be Amy. I just need to be Amy. And I need to let this percolate up in different words and forms and, because I could tell I was getting too sort of into a form, I guess, about everything. So I appreciate what you're saying about that. And yeah, and go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just thinking too about the journey it's kind of like of becoming more conscious, more awake as a human being. It's not all peaches and roses. It can be damn uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Times as I'm shifting from the way I used to show up to the way I feel, that difference in my feeling, the way there's a lot of loosening up means letting be. I was calling it letting go, but what am I letting go of? There's nothing I'm letting go of but the illusion and made up story in my head. And so letting be has been it's been a journey for me because I've labeled myself a stubborn and I'm not gonna give up. Damn it. And what I realize is it's not about even giving up. Allowing is making room for the great divine, the spirit of all life to do its work. When I'm in my head or I'm trying so hard or I'm seeking for another training or program, thinking somebody else know better and I got to learn more, then it's a lot of disrespect for that great divine intelligence just there waiting to guide me, always there, never giving up on me. I'm seeing that as we're planning the 11th year of this camp I had mentioned, and how I do that. I still somewhat coordinating, but also the way what I share out there is evolving from a different place. It's not just about culture or the parts of me as the Dena'ina and Athabascan person. The cultural parts are part of who I am. They are ways that been passed on for generations. It's what makes our culture a culture. And there are beautiful parts to it, like caring for the earth and cooperating in that deep sense of community. There's also parts that don't work for me that I've had to let go. And sometimes we can put a certain culture on a pedestal and just look at what's good and right, and all the other stuff can go. That's been part of my healing journey. All the other stuff could be discarded, but then they can still show up. And so the way I show up at this camp and what I pass on to me, it's important, more important than anything, not what we teach, but how we connect as human beings. And it's so easy. It's much easier because it's remote. We're at a historic ancestral village site in that area.
Tell us the name. Tell us the name of the lake. The people got curious.
Yeah, Qizhjeh Vena. So that means a place where people gather lake. The name was changed years ago and named after one of the first explorers, white explorers in the area, John Clark was named, changed to Lake Clark.
Is that what it is on the maps now? Lake Clark?
That's what it is. It's the park I used to work for is Lake Clark.
Yeah. I wanted to note something too that I've read is that in indigenous territories where indigenous people still have land stewardship rights, right, or have capacity to do land stewardship, those are some of the most biodiverse areas on Earth. And we really need to learn that. And what you're saying is so interesting because there's a way, the three principles are about the formless, right? Like who we are is beyond the form, and ultimately beyond our race, our gender, our color, our personality, something much deeper than that. And so I think sometimes there's a bit of an ideology or a dogma around like not acknowledging that there's race and that there's a history and that there are things that still need to be looked at and healed. How do you grapple with the idea of like we're all spiritual beings, all people, and then also there's indigenous people and they have issues or things that they're working on? How do you think about that?
Well, of course, you're right. We're all spiritual beings, and we also have very different experiences, including culturally. And there's certain themes that play out in the prejudices and injustices that's happened over the years. And those ways, for me, brought up certain traits generationally passed on. And I think sometimes when there's opportunity, talking about that experience is important in acknowledging real things that's happened, but not looking at the past, but also real things that's continuing to happen. The injustices, where some of like even the term tribes that labels us, puts us in groups, and also what we speak up for and have to address as a tribe to protect our land and fish and wildlife and environment and protect our rights as a cultural people, protect our homes, it's real. Because first and foremost, I know most all Indigenous people, the earth comes first. The earth is like the most important being we could ever know, that relationship. And that's part of this camp and teaching the young kids that relationship with the earth, that give and take. You don't take more than what's there. It's a balance in teaching some of those values. But some of those big issues in protecting, we've been fighting a huge mining company for the last 20 plus years, which could be the world's largest open pit mine in the world's last intact wild salmon run. And I'm saying this not to go into the issue, but to put out some of what we grapple with, what the challenges are. So we're, small tribes with limited resources, a big mining company with a tremendous amount of resources. And someone described this as, it's like we have a little paddle and there's a tornado coming in and we're trying to stop it with a paddle. And so those are some of the issues that can brings up a lot of stress. And if you only have a limited number of leadership, it gets tiring. If you don't speak up, things will happen that isn't good for the earth. I think it's being real. We can say everything is fine. I have my house, I have enough food, I have enough money, and I'm passing on the understanding, which is good and great, and it's important to pass it on. Also, it's opening the door wider to what some of these real issues. And I think this understanding can help us in our leadership in dealing with some of these issues also.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's been some work with, I guess, Ukrainians fighting a war, and that's real. People see, oh, that's real. That's a really real situation. That's really hard. What we have in this country is, you said it to me on another phone call. There's a war, and it's rolling back, I don't know if Mount Denali, is that in Alaska? I mean, didn't Trump change the name like back to McKinley or whatever it was?
Yeah, he changed it back to McKinley, who
Yeah.
was a white dude who,
Yeah.
yeah. And Denali was a native name from the beginning.
Denali. So here we go. Like, this is where I am like, a lot of people want to say, well, racism is in the past. Let's just forget it now that we're all equal, and I don't see color as something we hear a lot in spiritual circles. And, I would love for people to open their minds, like you say, just a little more to see what's really happening, because when you're in a place of privilege, it doesn't mean that you're on purpose ignoring things. It means that you just don't see a lot because you don't have to. You don't have to look. You're comfortable. You're not in a category of people who are being dismissed or disrespected or marginalized or deported or made to almost not exist, in some cases, and I'm thinking of the trans community. There is a war on Indigenous people as well. And so I don't think everyone has to be an activist necessarily, but at least to open one's mind. Because it's one thing to like work with people in refugee camps or in jails, but we also would like for people not to be in refugee camps and jails. And, and so that's sometimes looking at the systems for me, this is just my opinion, you can disagree, of neoliberal capitalism and racism and colonialism that perpetuate the injustices that we see. Or really, we need Earth. We need Mother Earth. That's so clear to me. And to not have that deep respect for our mother means that we won't live as a species. So,
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts about what I've said? I'm happy for you to disagree.
No, you're totally right on, Amy. One of the things I'm thinking about with the big changes coming up, and there's many, is DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion,
Yeah.
is no more. You can't
Mm-hmm.
use those terms if you work for the government, if you work for the Park Service. Thankfully, I retired from the park last July, so I'm not dealing with any of that, but I have colleagues and friends who are. And any words that relate to tribal, you cannot use the word tribal.
Whoa.
You cannot use the word subsistence, anything that has to do or raises a red flag with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, cannot be part of any of the work they do. And so we worked hard over the years, me and many, many Indigenous people who worked their way up to a level of the management, federal government, for example, team, where they had an equal voice and status, and that's gone.
Oh
It's one
gosh.
culture. It's one culture now, one perspective, one side minded that's running things. And we're kind of like, you're not there anymore, you're done. And to me, as an Indigenous person, Alaska Native person, I know that power, that doesn't take my power as a human being away. It takes the, like I mentioned, one is the resource, the equity is the equality in resources. It's the access to resources. It's our perspective and our voice at the table.
Yeah.
And it's lopsided again. And so more than ever, we need to talk about what's real in this life, not to dwell on it and complain
Exactly.
and whine about it, but to speak to what's real and how it affects different cultural people in this country. Because it's real.
It's very real at the moment. Boy, more real than it has been in some time. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe not. People have different experiences. It's not like every administration has been so wonderful on all these issues, but this one is something else. You know that phrase, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Not heard that.
Make sure you're at the table. I have a friend who works for the feds as well. I won't even cite their gender because they're so nervous now, like, because people are getting fired right and left and being forced to resign. And he said, there, I just went, I won't name the agency. Okay. They said they had to take down the pride flag that was hanging on their door. And they do mental health services, right? So really, it's like, respect for each other, respect for the dignity and humanity of all people. That's what's under attack. The dignity and humanity of all people. And I know my father did a weekend with Sid once up in Canada, and it was called Respect for the Individual. And that word respect means a lot to me in this context. Like, let's respect each other. And that's what's not happening. It's incredibly disrespectful, to take away the name, a cultural name for a mountain that was a big deal. I think because it used to be Mount McKinley and then it got changed, I think, right? And then it went back.
Denali, to the native name,
Yeah.
Denali. Yeah. And then now it's back to.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, so I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's really important. And I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about what you're working on because you've got I think a retreat that was almost going to be bought by like a tourist or a hospitality company. And you've got some things going on that people should know about. So I want to get the websites and the stuff that you could use some support for.
Yeah, I mentioned we started a nonprofit company. It's run by a group of Indigenous women here in Alaska. And we didn't, a lodge came up for sale in our home area, in my home area. I knew over the years, I felt the inkling that we need to, if this ever came up for sale, we needed that. I don't know where that came, but out of the blue, I'd email the lodge owner if he ever decided to sell. Once a year, I'd send an email out. Now that's divine intervention saying, okay, here you go, Karen, send an email. Well, it came up for sale over a year ago, and he reached out to me, giving me first opportunity to purchase. The lodge could have been swept up in no time because there's big money in our lake now, people with a lot of money. This owner held it for us, for our business to purchase. I had no idea, $800,000. Who am I going to get I had no idea, but I knew we had to. I said, okay, well, how
We'll
much
figure
time
it
do we
out.
have? After many months of planning and outreach and meetings and tapping into resources and key people who kind of knows the system better, we were granted a loan from a national native organization, Indian Collective, and we're able to purchase that lodge. And we've got it almost fully paid off through donors and other funding. We have like $1,000 left to pay it off. But that's been a huge, to me, it's been a celebration. And it's also an example of me staying open to possibility and potential. That thing people talk about, I used to say, yeah, right. That thing of there's infinite potential. I used to think, yeah, right, for you maybe. Well, you know what? I'm tapping into that. Now every time I get discouraged, and believe me, I was like, what the hell are we doing? It's too much. I can't do this.
Yeah.
Then I come back. Okay, who's in charge here? So it's happened. We've got the center. We're calling it a Dena'ina Center for Sustainable Living. We've got a website, a place where people gather, lake.org.
Okay. A place where people gather, lake.org.
Take lake out, no lake. A place where people gather.org.
Okay. Dena'ina Sustainable, what is it?
Center for Dena'ina Sustainable Living.
You know, my nonprofit was called the Center for Sustainable. What's it called? No. I think it was the Center for Sustainable Living. Yeah. CSL.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the place we're creating. We're planting, we're doing medicinal plants this summer. We're planting gardens, and we're holding a retreat, just one, because we've got a lot more work to do on the facilities and stuff. But we're having a gathering for tribal people, and we're bringing again the Insight Alliance up in August, and they will be supporting a retreat. We've also, our team will be helping them to share that, because we want to start, take more ownership in offering and passing on the understanding.
Yeah, I wanted to add that when I was in Winnipeg working with First Nations in Canada, and that's when I learned that people couldn't come in the summer because there were no roads out of the territories, right? So they had to wait for the winter, or they could only fly, but they had to wait for the winter because that's when they could drive across the lakes and rivers and things. Yeah, freezing cold in Winnipeg in the winter. But anyway, working with First Nations there, a lot of them were saying, well, I'm the mental health counselor, in my community. I'm the only one. And I'm feeling like overwhelmed, like I don't know how to handle all these different things. And what occurred to me then was how much the principles could translate for people because they're so simple, and how egalitarian that was, like to learn really simple things. You might not be able to articulate things in a fancy way, but to be able to just articulate about thought or being unbroken like that. Anyway, it just occurred to me how much impact the principles could have in that kind of a setting, because they don't have a whole bunch of people, counselors available. And so people are doing it. So it's like peer to peer, really.
Yes. And that's a kind of a Western trained model too. That's how it was for me when I worked in the council as a counselor in the village years ago.
Yeah.
I was trained. I was a mental health and alcohol counselor. And it was me. And it's a lonely place, but also, I mean, it's such a tremendous amount of responsibility you feel. The understanding is, to me, a level, it's an open playing field. How can we play with each other and all be responsible? And it starts with planting those seeds of how well we're made. And it gives others a sense of, oh, I have just as much power, because it also can keep that reliance on somebody else. The counselors there, they can help. It's just, yeah, those roles and those labels.
There's a model called co-counseling that some friends of mine are involved in, and I'm just going into a whole other thing, but I think it's kind of important to think about co-counseling as people get trained a lot, mostly to listen to one another and to listen very, very deeply. But there's a lot of similar ideas. Like one is that when you're young, you have access to this good feeling that we have this goodness inside of us. And then they talk about thinking too. It's different than the principles. They kind of have more of an emphasis on like discharging emotions, but they talk about good thinking, like maybe this isn't your best thinking. But what's interesting is that no one pays each other. They have a structure where people are getting trained. So that's good and that's nice. But then they meet each other as equals, as peers, and they take turns listening and then maybe reflecting back. And that's, I've often thought when I'm talking to my friends who are involved, like, gosh, it would be so cool to have, to somehow integrate the principles into that kind of a structure where people are even just listening is so profound, isn't it? Like just to listen to someone, that if people could do that without judgment and advice and all the, distraction, all the things that we get into, how healing that is for people.
Yeah. Listening beyond the problem, but also knowing you're acknowledging what's being said.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add before we end this session? And I do want to say that I've always been so impressed by you and the work you're doing and your feeling and tone. You have a gentle but also strong presence. And I'm hoping to be working with you in some form or another one day. Is there anything you want to share with people who might be listening, whether Indigenous or principles people or?
Yeah, chin on, Amy. Thank you, Amy, for your words. And I would just say thank you also for the opportunity and for what BIPOC is doing and the website and all the work that's gone into that. And just, I feel like it's a door opening wider for more opportunity and offerings. And I hope to be more part of that than I have been. But again, thank you.
Yeah. Well, now this is a big part, doing a video. All right. Well, let's stay in touch and we'll circle back sometime.
Okay. Chin on.
Okay. Thank you.